Welcome back to the Stylized Station Breakdown, where we have talented artists take over the channel for the day and share cool workflows, industry insights, and some rare tips and tricks. Today, I'm super happy to welcome the very talented Kathia, who's going to give us a 40-minute long masterclass on foliage creation. Whether it's grass, flowers, and any types of vegetation, every single budding environment artist needs to learn this. Get it? No? Speaking of foliage, if you want to become a true master of grass, foliage, and other 3D vegetation, check out my brand new environment art course for beginners called the Environment Artist Survival Kit, where you're going to learn everything from making flowing grass to fluffy trees and sweeping landscapes. All 13 hours of content are only $49 forever, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out the course. So put on your favorite gardening gloves, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video.
Hey everyone, my name is Kathia Lebon. I'm a French environment artist based in Lyon. In this video, we are going to talk about how I create vegetation and my process using Substance Designer and Autodesk Maya in order to achieve this scene on Unreal Engine 4. So let's dive in. First of all, let's see some references that I've used. I'm currently using the software Puref that I recommend because it's free and super useful. So, I wanted to create a deep forest such as the ones in Japan. I aimed for a humid atmosphere with some godray passing through the leaves, a lush vegetation, and also a ground covered with moss. So, for the atmosphere, I went by the game Hope as my main reference due to the colors and the lighting. It got some blue and green shades with some little touch of warmer colors. For the lush vegetation, I went by the amazing concepts of Lorenzo Lanfranconi. The way he translates nature in his concepts with his graphic style was quite an inspiration thanks to his color scale and his composition. My main references about Stylized style were from the Herzog artist Jimmy Malakier. I love how he represents his textures. It's smooth and it got low frequencies. By that I mean it's not that much noisy, and also the colorimetry matches what I wanted for the scene. For the global composition, I was of course inspired by Ghibli and their way to transfer reality to a magical and a mysterious world. That's it for the references of my artistic direction, but of course I went by plenty of the images for each plant that I created. For example, I'll show you 3 plants that I've made and the references that I've used. So, for the water lily, I like to get 3 photos of the plants in addition to a floral dissection in order to better understand how it's made, but also some pictures of traditional art in order to get the essence of how people can see them. So, as you can see, the plant is composed of mostly 3 to 4 parts, which are 2 to 3 rings of petals and the stamens. The stamens, which are the little yellow hair, but the plant is way more complex than that. But for my style, I went by this composition for recreating a water lily. For the fern, as another example, I've decomposed the plant by only the leaf blade. So, as you can see in this picture, there's a lot of more that compose this plant. For the leaf blade, it's composed of little leaves composed themselves by other little leaves to simplify. So for my leaf blade, I went by just leaves around the road in order to reduce the noise. Another example is my flower based on the concepts of Florian Coudray. As you can see, this is traditional watercolors concepts made for the game Kena Bridge of Spirits. I like how he painted his vegetation, it got a magical touch, so for my plant I went by this flower. But I simplified it by getting rid of all the little variations of colors and the noise, and I tried to get only gradients of the colors of the concept, because in games Vegetation is often seen from far away, so we can sometimes afford to reduce the frequencies. And that's it for the references of my vegetation. Now I'll show you how I create a foliage atlas in Substance Designer, and I'll give you some tips. To begin with, a definition in game art, a texture atlas, also called a sprite sheet or an image sprite, is an image containing multiple smaller images usually packed together to reduce overall dimensions. In my case, it will be about merging different parts of my plants. So I created my atlas with Substance Designer. However, there are plenty of ways to create a foliage atlas, such as modeling them in 3D software like ZBrush or Blender. And after you've got to bake them in order to get texture, but those are destructive way of doing it. Because if you want to change a little bit the shape of one leaf or the number of petals, you've got to export and import your high poly models and bake them again. Another way is 3D software, such as Photoshop or any other drawing soft. You can pack your atlas, but you got to make the other textures information from scratch, such as the ambient occlusion map, the normal map, and so on. And another way is photoscan, which is really interesting but will require a more complex treatment to achieve a stylized style. So that's why I wanted to do mine on Substance Designer, because of its practicity of reiterate and the parameters that allow me to change quickly every part of my class. Before showing you how to make an atlas, I'll show you how I make a leaf, because my main atlases are composed by multiple variations of this graph. Here's how I create most of my leaves. I'll deconstruct this graph and explain each part of it. So for the first part, here's a combination of nodes that allows me to get to the main shape of my leaf, based on a curve that I can control with points. So it's composed of a gradient linear 1 and a transformation 2D and a curve whose are going to a blend. I'm using the transformation 2D here and not the rotation already included in the gradient linear 1 because I will use its gradient in other part of my graphs. I'm using the subtract blending mode, which will subtract the foreground input, which is a transformation 2D, from the curve that I've made. So I get this blurry shape, which I will put in histogram scan in order to get a way to remap the contrast and the brightness of it. And I'll put this result in a self-transform grayscale in order to put it in the middle of the map by moving the axis X. And after I'm using mirror grayscale, and yeah, you've got your first leaf. But what's really powerful in this combination of nodes is that just by moving the point of your curve, you can change the shape of your leaves. So you can get various shapes of leaves just with this combination. That's it for the first part of my graph. With this shape of leaf, we can get a little bit further by adding a tip and some variations to it. So for a tip at the bottom of the shape, we'll need a directional warp with for intensity input, a mix of nodes composed by a gradient linear 3, a curve, and another combination of nodes which are going to be the mask for the curve. So for the background input of my blend, I'll just need the gradient linear 3 with the curve, with this kind of bend in order to reduce it like so. And for the mask of this curve, I need this kind of rigid bell with a transformation 2D. But yeah, I like to show you how I make this result because I will use it in other parts of my graph. In order to obtain this result, I will show you this combination of nodes. So to obtain this shape, I need more precisely a thorn with a scale of 2, and this is going into a transformation 2D with an offset on the y-axis. I need to reuse my gradient linear 3 and my gradient linear 1 used previously here in order to get this result. So my gradient linear 3 is going here on the curve with this kind of band, and my gradient linear 1 is just going here into this blend with blending mode multiply and opacity to 0.5. So I'll get this result, which is going into the background of this band. So this result will be used in other parts of my graph. But for the mask of my pointy thing here, I'll use a transformation 2D with a rotation to 180 degrees, thanks to the help of transformation 2D just by clicking here. I'll put my rotated shape in a level in order to reduce the brightness of the top of my shape. I've got the mask for my blend, and this blend is on multiply blending mode, and this is going into the intensity input of my directional warp. So my directional warp has a 90 degrees warp angle with a value of 20 to as you like. If you want something more pointy, you just have to move the value. And finally, for the variations of the leaf, in order to get something more organic, I will use a multi-directional warp grayscale with the directional warp as the input. And for the intensity input, I'll use a Gaussian noise multiplied by the inverted gradient linear 3, so that the center is not affected and thus keep the tip intact. So I've got this result with an opacity at 0.75, and this is going into my multi-directional warp. I got these parameters, but it's up to you. You can have something more chaotic by changing the different modes, directions, and the density. After seeing how to make the shape of the leaf, we are going to see how to make some veins, a correction border mask, and also some inner shape variations. So for the veins, I'm actually using a tile random, but you can use a stripes node also. You just have to put the shift value to 0 and move the value of the width and the number of stripes. So you get kinda the same thing. So for the tile random, my parameters are 4 for the Y amount. I've got a split mode on none, and I'll put my random X size to 0, and you can also move a little bit the amount of interstice. This is kinda the first path to my veins. I'll need something more disymmetric, so I'll use a directional warp with for intensity input a band composed by two values of it's just basically two uniform color black and white. You just have to press the D key down to pack them together. So I got something like that, and I need to bend it with another mask, and I will use this mask that I've used before, not the rotating one, because with this kind of brightness the lines will be bent as I would like them to. And as you can see, if I'm moving a transformation 2D, the lines will be changing. So I've got my first draft of my veins, but this is a little bit rough, so we're going to need some transformations in order to get to this result. First I need to invert it and make a mask for getting rid of the unwanted lines. I'll use this time the mask that I've used for the tip of the leaf, but with some other nodes So I'll use a blend multiplying my mask with my first draft of my veins in order to remove the border lines, and I will need another mask with a gradient for the rest of the lines. So I'll use the previous mask inverted, change it by the curve in order to get a way to control the gradient that will be removing the external parts of my veins. And finally, the last mask for just getting the vein inside of the shape of my leaf is made by getting a broad shape of my last shape of my leaf. So I'll use a blur and make a curve and blend it with the multiply mode in order just to get these veins. So for the correction border mask, I'll be back to my first draft of my veins, which is here, and I'll put a result in a distance, invert it, and blur it. I'll put this in the intensity input of the directional warp with the leaf shape that I've made from the multi-directional warp grayscale. So with this result, I'll put this in a blur, which is going into a bevel with a distance of 0.02 and a smoothing value around 2. And this is going into the background of a blend. And for the foreground of the blend, I'll invert the grayscale of my blur, put it in transformation 2D and make like a uniform scale by pressing down Ctrl Shift and moving this, just in order to get rid of the unwanted blurry shape. And I get this nice smooth border for my leaf. Next, for inner shape variations, I'll use Crystal 2 and a transformation 2D with a rotation to 90 degrees and a little bit of scaling. And this is going into a directional warp with for intensity input the same mask that I've used for the directional warp of my veins, so this one. So I'll get the same thing for consistency. So I'll put this result into a blur, and after I will put it into auto levels. And that's it for now for the inner shapes variations. Now there will be like 2 to 3 phases for merging all of this in our leaf. I'll use the previous result of my blur HQ grayscale and put it in a blend with a value of 0.5 in opacity. And with the background input, I will use an histogram range from the invert grayscale of the gradient linear 3. So I get this result. And I'll put this in another blend with multiply blending mode with for foreground inverted grayscale from a gradient linear 3. So I get this result, and you can move it as you like. So this is going into another blend with the last part of my leaf, which is from the correction border mask. So I get this result, and it's a multiply bending mode. And this is going into a curve to readjust the brightness of it. So now I'll take my inner shapes variations that I've made here with the Crystal 2. I'll make a blend with the curve. So I get this result, and I've got a blending mode overlay. And for the opacity, I've got 0.4, but you can move it as you like. Next part, I need to make a mid-rip for this leaf. So for this part, I need a shape with a square as for the pattern, and I'll move the sliders of the X and Y for getting like a thin rectangle. I'll use a transformation 2D for having something in the parameter for the scale of this shape. So I'll put this result into a Blur HQ grayscale with an intensity around 2, and this is going into a trapezoid transform grayscale with a no tiling mode to make it more triangular by switching these parameters. I'll put this result in a curve in order to get another shape like so. And I'll multiply a gradient to my midrib thanks to a gradient linear 1, rotated of 180 degrees, with a blend at 0.5 opacity. I'll put my midrib in a directional warp just from some variations with for intensity input the Gaussian nose that I've used before. And this is it, I've got my funnel rib. Now I'll get back to the veins. I like to get some valleys and not sticks like the midrib for the veins because in my opinion it will be too much noisy for a stylus style. So I'll put my midrib in a histogram scan to make it brighter and after in a blend with the veins that I've made before, as you can see here. The blend has a max blending mode in order to keep the maximum values between my two inputs. I'll put this result in a curve in order to readjust the brightness of the veins, as you can see, and I'll invert it because, as I've said earlier, I want some valleys and not some thick veins. And with this result, I'm going to put it in a blur with an intensity around 2. And this result is going a slope grayscale. And that's it for my veins. So for now, we are near from the end of the final leaf. So I'm back to the last leaf that I've made with the inner shapes variations from here. And I'll multiply it with the valleys of veins that I've made here. And I'll put this result into another blend in order to add my midrib with the max lighten blending mode, the rib from the directional warp that we made here. I'll put this result into another blend with an overlay blending mode, but this time for the foreground input, a gradient linear 1 that we've got here, and with an opacity to 0.5 in order to have something smoother. And I'll connect this result to a curve for getting the right brightness for my leaf. And I can finally put this into a directional warp if I want some variations. And this is the final result of my leaf. For the texturing, I'm using at first a gradient color and after a combination of nodes for creating more variations into the gradient. I'll use a technique founded from the work of Jimmy Malaki. He's using some bitmaps made from alpha found on internet, and I've made mine on Photoshop as well, and I'll import them after in my Substance file. So with those bitmaps, I'm going to splatter and blur them with some various color for obtaining like an abstract texture. I'm playing with the opacity from each plane till I get something I like. And I can finally merge my first gradient to this texture for having like a stylized texturing with different touch of color, and that's it for the texturing part. So we've seen how to make a leaf with this graph, and thanks to the different nodes that I've showed you, you can make a lot of different sleeves. And that's basically what I've done for all my atlases. I've like to make 4 to 6 different leaves, and I'll merge them all in one texture. With the help of a self-transform grayscale or thanks to transformation 2D. So as you can see, this is like the same first graph that I show you, but with some transformation. So here's basically the first leaf that I've made, for example, for the leaf blade of the fern. I'll use a tile sampler in order to make one part and a mirror grayscale, and I'll make a rib here and I'll merge them with the eye blend node. And as another example, for the clover, I've used a different way to create my leaf because I'd like to try something new. So basically I've used the shape and a directional warp in order to make like a heart shape. Yeah, I will use splatter circular in order to make the shape of it and make some variations with the Gaussian noise. So here it is. I'll blend all of my leaves that I've made as I said earlier. And I've got my atlases here, and I'll make the color as I said earlier with the Jimmy Malaki technique. And yeah, this is how I make my atlases. Next, after I've got my Foliage atlas from Substance Designer, I'm going on the soft Autodesk Maya, but you can choose Blender or another 3D soft as you like. So I'll create a plane where I will put my textures on. I just scale it to 2. So I will create like a new material, like a Lambert. And I'll just put my color map and my transparency map into this. So I'll go here and I put a file. I will search my file in my documents. So we'll go this one and I'll go back here and I will choose the transparency map 2, which is going to be here. So here I've got my plane with my foliage atlas. For having the transparency for the shadow in Maya, you've got to go to the renderer panels and go to the viewport 2.0 and check this box, transparent shadow. So now it's time for cutting. We are going to create each mesh for each part of the plant. And the shortcut for the multicut tool is Ctrl-Shift-X, as you can see here. I've got my multicut tool, and I'll be sure to get as few as possible of transparency for optimization. So I will switch to the top view mode. I'll just go here and focus on this one. So I will go with this plant, which is the leaf blade of the fern. So I'll just get here and here. And I will select this face and I will extract it. You can do also this combination, which is shift and right click, and you just have to extract your face. I've got this one. So here's my first plane with the first leaf. I'll check if preserve UVs mode is checked in order to not deform my textures on my plane. So if it's checked, my texture will be not deformed if I move the edges around it. If it's unchecked, sorry, as you can see, it's stretching my texture, so we don't want this. So I will remove a little bit the transparency by switching to the top view mode and moving my vertices like so. It's nice. Okay. And of course I will add some edges along the plane because I'll do some transformations after like a bend or some displacement. So I'll use the tool insert edge loop, which is to the mesh tools panel, which is here. I check this one. I can choose the number of edge loops. 6 is fine, so I'll just click here, drag and click here. And I also want to put one edges in the middle, so I'll just go with my multicut tool and I'll go here, like in the middle of the. So I will again switch to the top view mode in order to move my vertices and not interfere with the textures. So I will merge the vertices to the center. I just move it a little bit. And yeah, you kinda have to do it for each plant that you create. After I've got the excess of transparency removed, I got my first leaf blade for my fern. So I'll do this combination of transformation for the mesh, which are center pivot, because as you can see it's here. So it will center here. And delete this story because there are a lot of things that I've done with this mesh, so I'll just delete it. And I'll fringe transform it. So this is nice, it's good to go. After I got my plants with my plants, I'm going to do the vertex painting for the wind influence. The paint vertex tool is found in the mesh display panel. And you can also create some shortcut by pressing down Ctrl Shift and click on the tool that you want. I usually get one channel of RGB for the wind influence and save the others for more information. So you can choose the green, the red or the blue one. For the demonstration, I'll go with RGB, which is white. So you don't want like a perfect gradient all along the plane because each plant reacts differently with the wind. I used to do this, but I realized with time that you've got to test and reiterate if needed, of course. So I'm going to smooth it just a little bit. So yeah, this is nice. In order to see the textures of a plane, again, and not the vertex painting, you go to match display and toggle display color attribute. And after this says, I'll do some composition of plants, like 2 to 5 versions for diversity. I will use the band and of course moving my vertices, but I will always check if I don't interfere with the textures by moving my pawns. So for now I'll just make my fern with this process. Another checkpoint to see is the vertex normal. The vertex normals are invisible lines pointing out of a 3D model surface at each vertex, so here's a vertex normal for this vertex. The engine compares these normals against the light's direction. If the light is directly facing a normal, the surface is brightest there. When a normal is facing away from the light, the surface doesn't get lit by it. So if I'm taking my normals down by doing so, as you can see, my plant won't be lit by the light. In order to show the Vertex Normal, I go by Polygon and Vertex Normal. And this is kind of what we want for the Vertex Normal, but we can go a little bit further. And for that, I'll use a technique from Billeci, which is making a mesh with the shape of your plant in order to attribute the vertex normal data of this mesh on your plant. So here we go. I'll just make a cube and put it in the middle of my plant, scale it a little bit, and smooth it. I'll go about this number of division. I'll scale it a little bit again in order to cover the entire part of my plants. And right after that, I'm going to use the transfer attributes tool and I'll transfer my vertex position. So I'll take my plant and my sphere. So the vertex transfer attribute position is here. We are going to use vertex position and the vertex normal, but for now we are going by this. So I'll check this on and check this off. And I'll apply. And as you can see, my mesh is going to take the shape of my plant. So this is kind of what we want. We're going to do a center position, delete history, and freeze transform. And I scale it a little bit my mesh. I will smooth it again. And I will use the sculpting mode of Maya by smoothing it. So this is kind of what we want for the vertex normal attribution. So this mesh has this information for the vertex normal. And I will put the attributes of my mesh to my plant. So I'll take my mesh and next my plant. And I'll check this on and check this off. And yeah, that's it. My mesh of plant has the same vertex position of this mesh. So I'm going to delete this one and I'll toggle off the vertex painting. And yeah, that's it. You've got your first mesh ready to export for your engine. Thanks for watching. I hope that will help. I want to especially thank Thomas Elias Smith for giving me the opportunity to make this video. And if you want to follow my work, here's some of my information. I've got a project coming soon. I'll see you around and I wish you good luck.